Welcome to the Universim. Somehow or other you've wandered over to the edge of casual, and I am your host, Verso. And for the record, this is alpha version 0.0.33. This is an early access game available on Steam, amongst other places. So this is not a Let's Play, because I don't do those. I'm terrible at them. Or an instructional video. It's rather more of a knee-jerk take on the current state of the game. So, first impressions, I'm really only going to be talking about the early game experience because that's really as far as I've taken it so far. So just understand that anything you see here is not necessarily representative of how the game will function at release, but with that said, the developer, Crytivo, is more than happy to take your money right now if you want to pay them to play this game, so I think it's fair to start assessing the Universim on what's currently available. So, what is this game? Ostensibly, it's a god sim, somewhat in the style of black and white games of that nature. I saw a kind of funny, interesting post on the Steam discussion forum recently where a user was questioning whether this game truly is a god sim, because in his opinion, well, at present I should say, you don't have any real control over the planetary creation itself. So this user claimed that that makes the Universim more of a glorified management title, and I don't know about that. I mean, it does go to show you, though, that expectations might be a factor in how much you enjoy a game like this. I don't think it probably behooves us to obsess over genre classifications. At the end of the day, you do play the role of a deity, and you do have a whole host of god powers, so I think it makes sense to call it a god sim. Abilities are on the center mouse click menu if you ever need to get to them quickly, or they're also available from this little bubble on the left here. And, you know, they come in the variety of things like growing trees, creating storm clouds, tornadoes, even changing the season. My personal favorite is being able to romantically link two of your little sim characters, and you know, this can be useful if you think about it. Once you start looking at their inheritable traits in order to get a proper eugenics program going. I kind of wish there were more things to do like that, or you know, in that vein, but at this point there aren't really a ton of them. But anyway, let's go ahead and do the 10-cent tour here. I do want to make it clear that I've been charmed by what I've seen. So the curved world is a really interesting game feature to me that I've never seen before. And on the whole, I think the look of the game is just unique, and the user interface design is attractive and intuitive. It's also stuffed with jokes that, at least to me, are really funny. Your mileage may vary. They've got some good writers on hand, though, and FYI, there's no campaign mode on the roadmap, so I know some people are going to miss that. I don't usually get too far into the campaign modes anyway, but given that the writing is pretty high quality, it's kind of a shame that there isn't one. So, right, you've got all that. Moving on. So Universim 101, the game refers to your population as nuggets, and these little guys are fully simulated, and they're largely independent. They don't require a ton of intervention from the player, and in fact there really aren't a ton of ways for you to interact with them, even if you wanted to. Occasionally they will hit you up with a quest, but it's really not a vital part of the game loop. It's just a side activity. So your main task as the creator is basically to keep the trains running on time by guiding the research path and just ensuring that you fulfill the fairly simple resource needs of the population. Mostly that's just food and water, for a good while at least, what I've seen. And to that extent, the Universim isn't really any different from any other builder title. But conceptually, this is all sort of meant to be busy work, I think. It's just one of the tactics that you use to further the ends of your real central concern, which is kind of convincing your nuggets to actually believe that you exist. So, some explanation about that is probably in order. Nuggets are not born believers, right? And as far as I can tell, they don't seem to get their religion from their parents, as you would expect. I could be wrong. Maybe it happens occasionally. The point is, though, that you'll need to kind of touch their lives in some way in order for them to have faith in you. So whether that's healing them when they inevitably injure themselves, or kind of matching them up with their soulmate, or whatever, the benefit of faith is that the more of it that you have, the quicker you generate creator points, or CP, which you can use to do, you know, like all that creator stuff I was talking about before. So the question for you as the player comes down to, do you want to be a benevolent or a malevolent god? So, for the record, if you find your temple, which is around here somewhere, there it is, you can always check your progress. And as a side note, the temple seems to be the only building besides homes that your nuggets will actually build on their own. I'm not really sure why that is. It's kind of inconvenient, if I'm being honest, because you can't move it, which is vexing. So you just kind of have to hope that your nuggets will put that in a good place for you. All right, so if I'm being honest, I've only really gone the benevolent path so far. As you can see, these guys love me right now. I don't know why you would ever do differently, and there may be a very good reason to go the dark path, but at this point in the development of the Universim, there isn't a traditional tutorial, so it isn't made especially clear to the player through natural gameplay why you would go, light or dark. It's something I'd like to explore, however, if I spend more time with the game. But as to challenges, at least in the early game, the weather is kind of your main enemy, from what I've seen. Winter tends to hit pretty early on, and when it happens, the lakes will freeze over, so fishing is your main food source for a while. And obviously when you've got a frozen lake, they're not going out ice fishing, even though you would think that would have been a nice thing for them to do for you, but they don't. They're lazy, maybe. So there's some challenge there, especially as you likely haven't got the creator points yet to force change the season. But for the record, your nuggets, they don't care about going around in the snow with only a few leaves for clothing, so it's really only just the food situation that you have to worry about at the very beginning. And once you've gone out and killed a mammoth or whatever for them, they're largely good. Keep in mind, though, that your water wheels also freeze up during the winter time, and almost every production building, even the fishing pier, uses water for basic operation. So if your reservoirs run dry, you're kind of in deep doo-doo. Though, add to that the fact that seasons can vary in length, and you don't know what to expect until you research and build the weather tower, which is around here somewhere. And even then, even after you've built that, it can still be difficult to predict the sweet spot for water storage. But, I mean, it's easy enough to manage, but I'm just saying it's something that you shouldn't forget to do. And it's an easy thing for a new player to mess up, I think. But ultimately, what I see as the real pressure for you is the fact that your nuggets keep making babies at a somewhat unreasonable rate, I'd say. Though, interestingly enough, one of the ways that I've discovered to curb the baby boom, if you really want to, is to use your matchmaking powers in order to link up the same-sex couples. So yeah, that does work if you're so inclined. You can, of course, also sacrifice your subjects. That's a valid method if you want to go that path. But again, that gets back to my point from earlier about being a malevolent god. Though, I will admit that when I started noticing a bunch of lazy gluttons hanging about in my current game, even I started pondering ways to end their genetic lines. So, to be sure, I honestly have no idea how to even sacrifice my population if I wanted to. So the in-game wiki, which you can get to by clicking the question mark in the corner, it mentions ritual sacrifice, but whether that's just picking up a nugget with telekinesis and dropping him from the sky, or if you have to specifically do this on the temple or not, I don't know. But, it's in there in some form. Okay, so you got the idea, and if you have questions about anything I've said, please let me know. I do want to talk about some annoyances, though, and I'm just going to get my major frustration off my chest first. So in the present state of the game, the thirst need for nuggets decays way too quickly, and the well replenishment rate is way too slow. So even with a few upgrades built in from the research tree, I'm still building wells all over the friggin' place. And I've got dangerously dehydrated nuggets choosing to drink from the lake, which you wouldn't think would be that big of a deal, but every single dang time they get sick from doing it. And this either takes them out of the workforce for a bit while they get better at the witch doctor's building, which is also a hospital. Or you can spend your creator points to heal them, which doesn't cost a lot, but, just kind of a pain in the butt. I don't know, I just don't really like the mechanic. It kind of feels like you need an unreasonable number of wells, and I don't know. Potentially this problem gets alleviated later in the game, but from a casual perspective, just looking at the early experience, it irks me. It irks me, that's all I'll say. So similarly, these nuggets are also apparently terrible builders because all of the buildings are constantly on the verge of collapsing. The game encourages you to plop down engineer buildings in order to address that decay. But again, right now, the upgrades to the engineering building, they come a little bit too deep into the research tree. So I find myself constantly going around with my god powers to rejuvenate buildings. And as a side note, rejuvenate ability is the same as the one that you use to heal injured and sick nuggets. So additionally, your engineers have a coverage area on the building, but because the nuggets, as I mentioned, build their own homes, sometimes they'll build them outside of the coverage area of your engineering hut. And I don't know, maybe it's a minor annoyance, if I'm being honest. Maybe I'm making a bigger deal out of it than I need to, but at a certain point I started receiving a lot of notifications about buildings being in shambles, and I just found it to be a distraction. So I've never really been a fan of having to micromanage upkeep in builder games, and I'm more of a big picture player, so yeah, again, irksome, but not the end of the world. Finally, I know the developers are working on this, but I feel like this game will benefit a lot from some sort of road system. So I don't yet have a good sense of how to keep things all organized in this game, and I appreciate the free placement of buildings, but the buildings themselves, they all seem very large somehow, and these cities become sprawling sooner rather than later, or at least it looks like it's sprawling, just because the planets aren't that big. And with regard to that, the game starts you with a single epicenter for your civilization, which is this evolution tower, right? And this functions, so this is supposed to function as the epicenter of your civilization, but the only thing about it is that I honestly have no idea if it even does anything. I presume that it does. I think it's meant to be sort of like your capital, the capital of your civilization. It's where they hold elections and that sort of thing. But beyond that, I don't know what it does. I presume it probably does something else, and my initial instinct was to build everything outward from this building in concentric rings, kind of like I was playing Frostpunk, but I kind of quickly gave up on that approach as it just wasn't looking very good. I started attempting some sort of loose grid system, and I didn't really notice much of a difference as far as how well my civilization was performing. So maybe also it's something about the color palette, but I often have a difficult time kind of spotting specific buildings on the globe. And I'm hoping that if Crytivo can get a proper roads system in here, that will help with kind of quick wayfinding needs. But for the record, I do want to mention that the game does provide some really nice little screeners at the top of your window for both buildings and people. And these are very robust even at this point in the game development, and honestly more games should have features like this. So, okay, somewhat disorganized feedback there. These are just knee-jerk thoughts, as I said at the beginning, so feel free to let me know what you think below. In the meantime, thanks for listening, and keep it casual.